She walked through the doors of the high-end restaurant just like she did every evening. Her black shoes made soft taps on the polished floor, and her plain white shirt was tucked in neatly. She didn't wear makeup, didn't speak much, and didn't try to stand out. Most customers didn't even remember her face after they left. She was just the waitress, quiet, careful, and always polite. The place was fancy. A grand piano sat at the corner of the room, shining under the soft golden lights. Expensive food, slow jazz music, and well-dressed people filled the air every night. The waiters were trained to serve with a smile and not speak unless spoken. Too, and she followed that rule well. No one really knew much about her. Some of the other staff sometimes joked about how she was like a ghost, always there, always watching, but never seen. She never joined in group talks, never shared stories. When others went home after their shifts, she stayed back to clean. Quietly, she never asked for help. She just worked. She wasn't cold or rude. In fact, she was kind. She helped the dishwasher when he dropped plates. She stayed late when the manager needed an extra hand. She once even gave her sandwich to a hungry intern who had forgotten his dinner, but still she kept to herself. The only time her eyes lit up was when she glanced at the piano. Every now and then, while passing by, she would look at it. Not in a jealous or longing way, but almost like someone greeting an old friend from far away. No one noticed this small moment except maybe the cleaning lady, who once caught her gently wiping the piano keys with a soft cloth after closing time. Some nights, when the restaurant was quiet, she would sit near the piano, not to play it, but just to be near it. She'd place a hand on the edge and sit in silence for a minute or two, as if remembering something. Then she'd get up and leave like nothing happened. She never talked about her past, never spoke of family, school, or dreams. To the rest of the staff, she was just a hard-working girl trying to earn her wage. They respected her for that, but they didn't ask questions. They thought maybe she had a tough life and didn't want to open up. Or maybe she was just shy. Customers treated her like they treated most waiters in such places, as polite nods. Short thank yous and nothing more. They noticed the food, the music, the lights, but not the person carrying their plates. And she accepted that. She didn't complain. She just did her job. But there was something hidden inside her, part of her that was locked away. Fire that once burned bright, now just a small, quiet flame. Though no one saw it, it was still there. One night, all of that would change. One night, someone would notice her. Not for her speed, her silence, or her service, but for something else. Something much bigger. But for now, she remained the quiet girl in the corner, holding back a story that was waiting to be told. It was a quiet weekday evening at the restaurant. The lights were dim and warm, casting soft shadows on the walls. The smell of fresh bread and herbs filled the air. The usual soft music played in the background, and a few regular guests sat chatting over wine. Everything was calmed, till a man in a dark suit walked through the front door. He wasn't just any man. People knew his face from news articles and magazine covers. He was a rich businessman. Not the kind who showed off his money with gold watches or loud clothes. He had class but also power. And wherever he went, people paid attention. The staff froze for a second when they saw him. The manager quickly walked over, greeted him with a big smile, and led him to the best table by the window. A few customers turned their heads, whispering quietly. His name carried weight in the business world. Some even said he was a genius. Others said he was just lucky. But everyone agreed on one thing. He was sharp, and he liked to test people. The waitress, as usual, kept her head down. She was assigned to his table that night. Her steps were steady, her voice soft, and her face calm. She didn't act impressed. She treated him just like any other guest, with respect but without fear. Maybe that's what caught his attention. He watched her closely as she poured his water and took his order. There was something different about her, something he couldn't place. She didn't try to impress him, didn't smile too much, and didn't fake politeness. She was real, honest, and for some reason that made him curious. After placing his order, he leaned back in his chair and looked around the restaurant. His eyes landed on the grand piano in the corner, smiled a little, and then looked back at the waitress, who had just finished clearing the table next to his. "Do you play the piano?" asked her casually. his voice calm but clear enough. For a few nearby tables to hear, she paused for a second, caught off guard by the question. Her eyes flicked toward the piano, then back at him. I used to, she said simply. Interesting, he replied, raising his eyebrows slightly. I had a feeling. The people at the nearby tables started to listen in. The room wasn't loud, and the man's deep voice carried easily. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. How about a little challenge, he said with a small smile. You play something right now, anything, and if you impress me, I'll double whatever you earn here in a month. The room grew quiet. The waitress blinked. She looked at him, then at her manager, who was watching nervously from across the room. She didn't speak right away. Her hands were holding the tray tightly, but her face stayed calm. I'm just a waitress, sir, she said, trying to end the moment. But the man didn't back down. He tapped the table gently and said, Everyone is more than what they appear. Come on, let's see what's hiding behind that quiet face. Now the whole restaurant was listening. Forks stopped moving. Conversations paused. All eyes were on her. She didn't like attention. She didn't want the spotlight. But something in his tone stirred something inside her. She hadn't touched a piano in a long time, but the music had never left her. She looked at the piano again. Her heart beat a little faster. Her fingers tingled. For a moment she stood still, thinking, and then, without saying a word, she slowly placed her tray on the side counter and walked toward the grand piano. The room stayed silent. Nobody knew what was about to happen. But they all felt something special was coming. She stood near the piano now, unsure of what to do next. The rich man had made his offer in front of everyone, and now all eyes were on her. A few people were whispering. A few were watching silently. The room wasn't loud anymore, just full of quiet tension. Her heart was beating faster than usual. She could hear it in her ears. Her hands felt cold, and her legs felt heavy. She hadn't played in years, not in front of anyone, not since everything changed in her life. Back then, music was her world. It was her dream. Been pushed away by life, by loss, by responsibilities. Still deep inside, it never left her. The man at the table leaned back in his chair with a slight smile. He wasn't mocking her, but he was testing her. That was clear. Maybe he thought this would be a fun little moment, a waitress trying and failing to impress. Maybe he didn't expect much. Maybe no one did. She looked over at her manager. Well, he gave a short, nervous shake of his head, like he didn't want trouble. But he didn't stop her. She looked at the piano again, stood there quietly, waiting, clean and shiny. A beautiful instrument that hadn't been touched in weeks. The waitress took a deep breath. She slowly pulled out the piano bench and sat down. The soft creak of the bench was the only sound in the room. She placed her fingers gently on the keys, not pressing them yet. Her eyes closed for a second. Memories rushed back. Her mother's voice, encouraging her. The sound of her teacher's praise. The nights she practiced for hours, dreaming of becoming a performer. All of it felt so far away, but also just under the surface. She opened her eyes again. She wasn't doing this for the money. Not for the rich man. Not even for the guests watching her. She was doing it for herself, to see if the music still lived in her fingers. She pressed the first key. It was soft, almost unsure. Then came the next. Then the next. Slowly, a melody began to form. Something simple. Something warm. A tune from her childhood, a piece she played for her parents when she was small. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud, but it was honest. The room stayed silent. People who had been ready to laugh didn't. They just listened. The melody grew stronger. Her hands moved with more confidence now. The notes were smooth, full of feeling. The sound filled the restaurant in a way no one expected. Not dramatic, not loud, but real. The rich man's smile faded into something else, a thoughtful look. He sat still, watching her closely, his drink untouched. The waitress kept playing her back straight, her eyes half closed, her fingers dancing gently across the keys. It wasn't a performance. It was a moment of quiet conversation between her and the music. One of the guests near the window leaned forward, whispering, "She's actually good." Another nodded. More than good. By the time she reached the middle of the piece, it felt like time had slowed down. The waiters had stopped moving. The kitchen door didn't swing. Even the soft music that usually played from the speakers had been turned off. It was just her and the piano now. No one expected this. No one saw it coming. A waitress, standing among millionaires, business people, and guests, dressed in silk and suits, playing music that touched hearts more than any rich performance could. The rich man didn't say a word. He just watched, his fingers tapping slowly on the edge of the table. And the waitress? She didn't notice the looks anymore. She didn't see the phones being slowly lifted to record. She didn't care about the deal or the challenge. For those few minutes, she was home again. She sat at the piano with her back to the room, her fingers still moving across the keys. The soft, beautiful notes filled every corner of the restaurant. People weren't talking anymore. They were just listening, completely still. It was like they didn't want to miss a single second. Nobody expected this. When the rich man had made his offer, many thought it would just be a joke, a few off-key notes and some polite claps. But now, they were witnessing something different, something real, something honest. The waitress didn't move her body much. She just sat straight, calm, and focused. Her hands did all the speaking. Her fingers told a story, and the piano carried. Her voice to every ear in the room. The melody wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't need to be. It had feeling, had truth. And that was what caught everyone's heart at the back of the restaurant. Near the kitchen door, one of the young waiters peeked out and froze. He whispered to another worker, who came and stood beside him. Soon, more staff gathered at the edges of the room, watching silently. Even the head chef came out, wiping his hands on a towel. Eyebrows raised in surprise. The manager stood near the bar, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. A few days ago, he had warned her to focus on her work, to stop touching the piano. After closing hours, but now, like everyone else, he was standing still, listening to a side of her he had never seen. A couple sitting near the window looked at each other. The woman whispered, "She's incredible. Who is she?" "I don't know," the man replied, eyes fixed on the piano. "But this feels like something special." Even the children at one of the family tables, who had been fidgeting and bored earlier, were now quiet. They stared at the piano like it was magic, and at the center of it all, the rich man leaned forward, his eyes on the waitress. He wasn't smiling anymore. He looked serious, deep in thought. The table lightly, not in annoyance, but in rhythm with the music. He had thrown out the challenge without much thought. He had done it to pass time, to stir things up. But now, he was seeing something he hadn't planned for. The piece she played wasn't long, just a few minutes, but it felt full of emotion, full of her story. As the final note rang out and faded, there was a moment of pure silence. No one moved, no one spoke. Then, slowly, someone clapped. A single, quiet clap, and then another. In seconds, the whole room was filled with applause. Gentle at first, then louder. People stood up. Some even whistled. The sound echoed through the restaurant and the waitress. She stayed seated, looking down at the keys. Her hands rested on her lap now, still and peaceful. She stood up slowly and gave a small nod to the room. Her face was calm, but her eyes were wet. She had not expected this. She wasn't looking for praise. She only wanted to touch the piano again. But now she had touched something else, people's hearts. The rich man stood up too. He walked over to her, stopping just beside the piano. The applause faded into quiet again. He looked at her for a moment, then said softly, "You don't belong in the background." She didn't answer. She just gave a small smile, then turned and quietly walked back toward the kitchen, her steps slow and steady. The room remained quiet for a while, even after she was gone. The sound of her music still lingered in the air. Something had changed that night, and everyone in the room felt it. The kitchen door swung closed behind her as she stepped inside. The sound of the restaurant faded a little, but she could still feel the weight of what had just happened. Her hands were still slightly shaking, not from fear, but from the feeling of being seen for the first time in a long time. Inside the kitchen, a few staff members stared at her. Some smiled gently, others simply nodded in respect. They didn't know what to say, and she didn't expect them to. She placed her tray down, washed her hands, and returned to work as if nothing had happened. But deep inside, everything felt different now. The rich man was still sitting at his table. He hadn't touched his drink. The guests around him were still talking about the unexpected performance. A few had even recorded short clips of her playing, and they were already showing them to others nearby. Who knew a waitress could play like that? One of the guests whispered. It felt like she was telling a story through her music, said another. The rich man didn't say anything. He simply sat there, quietly thinking. When the waitress came back into the dining area, carrying a tray with coffee for another table, the clapping began again, not loud like before, but respectful and warm. She paused for a second, unsure whether to smile or just keep moving. She chose the second option and continued with her work, staying quiet as usual. But this time, there was a different kind of silence around her, one filled with admiration. As she walked past the piano again, her fingers brushed across the edge of it without stopping. She didn't look at it, but her touch said everything. That piano for a few short minutes had reminded her of who she really was. Later, while she was refilling water glasses, the rich man waved her over. She walked to his table carefully, her hands steady now, her face neutral. He looked at her and said softly, "Do you know what you just did?" She looked down for a second and then said, "I just played a piece I used to know." He leaned forward. "No. You reminded a room full of busy, tired, distracted people how to feel something real. That's rare." She didn't know how to respond to that, so she just stood quietly. He reached into his coat pocket and placed something on the table. It was a business card, simple, clean, with a logo on it that looked like it belonged to a music or media company. "I own a studio," he said. "I'd like you to come visit. No pressure, no contract. Just come play for me again. On your terms." She stared at the card, but didn't pick it up. Her heart was pounding again. Not with fear, but with disbelief. "I'm not a performer," she said quietly. "Not anymore." He smiled, not in a mocking way, but kindly. "Maybe, or maybe you just forgot who you were for a while." She didn't answer. She simply nodded, picked up the empty cup from his table, and walked away. Back in the kitchen, she stared at the card for a long time. She had slipped it into her apron without thinking, but now she held it in her hands. The logo was small, the name unfamiliar to her, but something about it made her pause. Outside, guests began leaving. Many of them gave her kind looks as they walked by. Some smiled. A few even said thank you, not for the food or service, but for the music. She didn't smile back. Not because she wasn't happy, but because she still didn't know how to take it all in. Her world had shifted in one night, and she didn't even know what to do with it yet. But one thing was sure, the silence that used to follow. Her everywhere was now filled with music again. The next morning felt different. The world outside looked the same: busy streets, noisy cars, and cold wind brushing against her face, but something inside her had changed. She walked to work like she always did, wearing the same black shoes and plain coat, but now, the business card was tucked safely in her pocket. All night, she had looked at it again and again, wondering what it meant. Was it real? Was it a joke? Or was it just a kind gesture with no real end? She had almost thrown it away, but something stopped her. When she reached the restaurant, a few staff members were already there, cleaning and setting up. Some gave her small smiles. One of the younger waiters clapped softly as she walked in, teasing, "Our star pianist has arrived." She smiled a little, but didn't say anything. She just tied her apron and got back to work. But throughout the day, the memory of last night kept floating back. Not just the applause or the offer, but the feeling. It's the feeling of sitting in front of the piano. The way her fingers moved without thought. The way her heart had opened up, even just for a few minutes. It was something she hadn't felt in years. She had stopped playing after her parents passed away. Back then, everything fell apart. She had to leave school, get a job, and survive. Music didn't pay bills. Music didn't feed her, so she buried it deep. She didn't touch a piano, didn't talk about it. She convinced herself it was just a part of childhood, nothing more. But last night, that part came alive again. When her shift ended, she walked home in the cold. Her fingers were tucked in her sleeves to stay warm. Streetlights were glowing orange, and her breath made clouds in the air. She reached her small apartment, climbed the stairs, and stepped inside. It was quiet. She sat at the small kitchen table, pulled out the card again, and stared at it. Her hands brushed over the raised letters, still unsure. Finally, she picked. Up her phone, she didn't call. She just searched the studio name. To her surprise, it was real. Very real. A respected place. Known for recording talented new artists. She scrolled through the pictures on musicians, producers, sound rooms, smiling faces, and then she saw something that made her stop. A short video from the restaurant. From last night, someone had uploaded a clip of her playing. Just under 2 minutes. She clicked on it. There she was, sitting straight, fingers moving across the keys. The sound wasn't perfect, but the emotion came through. In the comments below, strangers had written things like, "This touched my heart. I felt this. Who is she?" She covered her mouth with her hand. She didn't cry, but her eyes filled with water. Not because she wanted fame or attention, but because someone had heard her. After so many years of silence, her voice had finally been heard again, not through words, but through music. She didn't decide right away. She didn't call the studio that night, but she did something else. She opened the old storage box in her closet and pulled out a notebook. Inside, it were pages of music she had once written, finished pieces, little songs, soft melodies. She flipped through them slowly, like meeting old friends. She sat down at her small desk, picked up a pencil, and began writing again. Not because she had to, not for the money or attention, but because the music had come back, and it wanted. To stay that night, she didn't need applause. She didn't need promises. She just needed the sound of a pencil tapping paper, and the feeling of coming back to life. A week passed, she still worked at the restaurant serving food, clearing tables and pouring drinks like before. But now something felt different. She stood a little taller. Her steps had more purpose. Her silence no longer felt heavy. It felt peaceful. The guests remembered her now. Not as the quiet girl who served their meals, but as the one who made the piano come alive. Some smiled when they saw her. A few asked when she'd play again. She always smiled gently and said nothing. But the light in her eyes said everything. The video had spread, not in a viral, wild way, but slowly, quietly, just like her. People had shared it because it touched something in them. There was no flashing stage, no expensive dress, no big performance. It's just one girl, sitting at a piano, pouring out her soul in music. And the rich man? He came back. One evening, near closing time, he walked in alone. No group, no loud voice. Just him and a soft nod toward the staff. He asked for a seat near the piano. The manager gave it without question. She saw him from across the room and felt her heart beat faster, but she didn't run. She didn't hide. After the meal, he waved her over. This time she didn't hesitate. He smiled and placed a small envelope on the table. "I kept my promise," he said. "This is just the start." She looked at it, but didn't reach for it. "I didn't come here to collect anything," she said softly. "I just wanted to know if the music inside me was still real." "It is," he said without smiling. "The world needs to hear." He stood up and placed a second item on the tabula small flash drive. "What's this?" she asked. He looked her in the eyes. "The piano last week was old, out of tune, and picked up by a phone. I had the audio cleaned up. It's beautiful." "That's your first recording?" She stared at it, then slowly picked it up. "You don't have to decide anything today," he added, "but if you choose music again, truly choose it. Doors will Open, she didn't answer. She didn't need to. Later that night, when the lights were low and the chairs stacked, she sat alone at the piano again. The staff had gone home. The music player had been turned off. Only the sound of the street outside remained. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and played. Not because someone asked, not because of a challenge. She played because the music had waited long enough. Each note filled the empty room like sunlight through a window. There was no audience, no phone recording, just her, the piano, and the quiet night. When she finished, she opened her eyes and smiled. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Maybe she would visit the studio. Maybe she'd write new songs. Maybe her life would change completely, or maybe it wouldn't. But now, none of that mattered. Because in that moment, she wasn't just a waitress. She was herself again. And somewhere deep inside, she knew this was just the beginning.